the earliest civilizations. Our Atlantean ancestors differed more from present-day man than anyone would imagine, whose knowledge is confined wholly to the world of the senses. This difference extended not only to external appearance but also to spiritual faculties. Their knowledge, their technical skills, indeed their entire civilization differed from what can be observed today. If we go back to the first periods of Atlantean humanity, we find a mental capacity quite different from ours, logical reason, and the power of arithmetical combination, on which everything rests that is produced today, were totally absent among the first Atlanteans. On the other hand, they had a highly developed memory. This memory was one of their most prominent mental faculties. For example, Atlanteans did not calculate as we do, by learning certain rules which they then applied. A multiplication table was something totally unknown in Atlantean times. Nobody impressed upon their mind that 3 times 4 is 12. In the event that they had to perform such a calculation, they could do so because they remembered identical or similar situations. They remembered how it had been on previous occasions. It has to be understood that each time a new faculty develops in an organism, an old faculty loses power and acuteness. People of today are superior to the Atlanteans in logical reasoning, in the ability to combine. On the other hand, memory has deteriorated. Nowadays people think in concepts. The Atlanteans thought in images. When an image appeared in their soul, they remembered a great many similar images which they had already experienced. They directed their judgment accordingly. For this reason, all teaching at that time was different from what it became later. It was not calculated to furnish children with rules, to sharpen their reason. Instead, life was presented to them in vivid images, so that later they could remember as much as possible when they had to act under particular conditions. When the children had grown up and had gone out into life, they could remember something similar which had been presented to them in the course of their education for everything they had to do. They could manage best when the new situation was similar to one they had already seen. Under totally new conditions, the Atlantean had to rely on experiment. Much has been spared modern human beings in this respect due to the fact that they are equipped with rules which they can easily apply in any new situations. The Atlantean system of education gave a uniformity to all of life. Over long periods of time things were repeated as they had always been done. The Atlanteans' faithful memory did not allow anything to develop that was even remotely similar to the rapidity of progress as we experience it today. One did what one had always seen before. One did not invent, one remembered. It was not the person who had learned much, but rather the person who had experienced much and therefore could remember much who was considered to be an authority. In the Atlantean period, it would have been impossible for someone to decide an important matter before reaching a certain age. One had confidence only in a person who could look back upon long experience. What has been said here was not true of the initiates and their schools, for they were in advance of the stage to which their age had developed. The decisive factor for admission into such was not age, but whether in their previous incarnations applicants had acquired the faculties for receiving higher wisdom. The confidence placed in the initiates and their representatives during the Atlantean period was not based on the richness of their personal experience, but rather on the antiquity of their wisdom. With initiates, personality ceases to have any importance. They are totally in the service of eternal wisdom. Therefore, the features which characterize a particular period do not apply to them. While the power to think logically was absent among the Atlanteans, especially the earlier ones, they possessed something in their highly developed memory which gave a special character to everything they did. Other powers are always connected with the essential character of any given human power. Memory is more closely linked to the deeper foundation of man and nature than is reason, and in this context other powers were developed which were more closely connected to those of the subordinate beings of nature than our contemporary human powers. Thus the Atlanteans could control what we call the life force. In the same way that today we extract the energy of heat from coal and transform it into motive power for our means of transport, the Atlanteans knew how to put the germinal energy of organisms into the service of their technology. One can form an idea of this if we look at it in the following way. Think of seed grain. Energy lies dormant in it. This energy causes the stalk to sprout from the kernel. Nature can awaken this energy which reposes in the seed. Modern human beings cannot do it at will. They must bury the in the ground and leave its awakening to the forces of nature. Atlanteans could do something else. They knew how to change the energy of a pile of grain into technological power, just as modern human beings can change the heat energy of a pile of coal into such power. Plants were cultivated in the Atlantean period not merely for use as foodstuffs but also in order to make the energies dormant in them available to commerce and industry. Just as we have methods of transforming the energy dormant in coal into energy of motion in our steam engines, so the Atlanteans had devices which they fueled, in a manner of speaking, with plant seeds, and in which the life force was transformed into technologically utilizable power. The vehicles of the Atlanteans, which floated a short distance above the ground, were moved in this way. These vehicles traveled at a height lower than that of the mountain ranges of the Atlantean period, and they had steering mechanisms by the aid of which they could rise above these mountain ranges. One must imagine that with the passage of time all conditions on our Earth have changed very much. Today, the above-mentioned vehicles of the Atlanteans would be totally useless. Their usefulness depended on the fact that at that time the cover of air which enveloped the Earth was much denser than it is now. Whether in the face of current scientific beliefs one can easily imagine such greater density of air need not occupy us here. By their very nature, science and logical thinking can never decide what is possible or impossible. Their only function is to explain what has been ascertained by experience and observation. All above-mentioned density of air is as much a certainty for esoteric experience as any present-day fact given by the senses can be. Equally certain, however, is the fact, perhaps even more inexplicable for contemporary physics and chemistry, that at that time the water on the whole Earth was much thinner than today. Because of this thinness, the water could be directed by the germinal energy used by the Atlanteans into technical services which today are impossible. As a result of the increased density of water, it has become impossible to move and to direct it in such ingenious ways as once were possible. From this it must be sufficiently clear that the civilization of the Atlantean period was radically different from ours. It will also be understood that the physical nature of an Atlantean was quite different from that of a contemporary person. An Atlantean took into himself water which could be used by the life force inherent in his own body in a manner quite different from what is possible in today's physical body. It was due to this that the Atlantean could consciously employ his physical powers in an entirely different way from a person today. He had, so to speak, the means to increase the physical powers in himself when he needed them for what he was doing. In order to have an accurate conception of the Atlanteans, one must know that their ideas of fatigue and the depletion of forces were quite different from those of present-day man. An Atlantean settlement, as must be evident from everything we have described, had a character which in no way resembled that of a modern city. In such a settlement everything was, on the contrary, still in alliance with nature. It is no more than a vaguely similar picture if we say that in the first Atlantean periods, about to the middle of the third subrace, a settlement resembled a garden in which the houses were built of trees with artfully intertwined branches. What the work of human hands created at that time grew out of nature, and people themselves felt wholly related to nature. Hence their social sense also was quite different from that of today. After all, nature is common to all human beings. What the Atlanteans built up on the basis of nature they considered to be common property, just as people today think it only natural to consider as their private property what their ingenuity and intelligence have created for them. Anyone who familiarizes themselves with the idea that the Atlanteans were equipped with such spiritual and physical powers as have been described will also understand that in still earlier times mankind presented a picture which will remind them in only a few particulars of what they are accustomed to see today. Not only human beings, but also surrounding nature has changed enormously in the course of time. Plant and animal forms have become different. All of nature has been subjected to transformation. Once inhabited regions of the earth have been destroyed. Others have come into existence. The ancestors of the Atlanteans lived in a region which has disappeared, the main part of which lay south of present-day Asia. In theosophical writings they are called the Lemurians. After they had passed through various stages of development, the greatest part of them declined. They became stunted, and their descendants still inhabit certain parts of the earth today as so-called savage tribes. But a small section of Lemurian humanity was capable of further development. From this part the Atlanteans were formed. Later, something similar again took place. The greatest part of the Atlantean population declined, and from a small portion the so-called Indo-Europeans descended who belonged to present-day civilized humanity. According to the nomenclature of the science of the spirit, the Lemurians, Atlanteans, and Indo-Europeans are root races of mankind. If one imagines that two such root races preceded the Lemurians and that two will succeed the Indo-Europeans in the future, one obtains a total 7. One always arises from the other in the manner just indicated with respect to the Lemurians, Atlanteans, and Indo-Europeans. Each root race has physical and mental characteristics which are quite different from those of the preceding one. While, for example, the Atlanteans especially developed memory and everything connected with it, at the present time it is the task of the Indo-Europeans to develop the faculty of thought, and all that belongs to it. Various stages must also be passed through in each root race. There are always 7 of these. In the beginning of a period associated with a root race, its principal characteristics are in a youthful condition, slowly they attain maturity, and finally enter a decline. The population of a root race is thus divided into 7 subraces. But one must not imagine that one subrace immediately disappears when a new one develops. Each one may maintain itself for a long time while others are developing alongside it. Thus there are always populations which show different stages of development living together on Earth. The first subrace of the Atlanteans developed from a very advanced part of the Lemurians who had a high evolutionary potential. The faculty of memory appeared only in its rudiments among the Lemurians, and then only in the last period of their development. We must imagine that while Lemurians could form ideas of what they were experiencing, they could not preserve these ideas. They immediately forgot what they had represented to themselves. But that they nevertheless lived in a certain civilization, that, for example, they had tools, erected buildings and so forth was owed not to their own powers of conception, but to a mental force within them which was, for want of a better word, instinctive. However, one must not imagine this to have been the present-day instinct of animals, but one of a different kind. Theosophical writings call the first subrace of the Atlanteans the Mohals. The memory of this race was primarily directed towards vivid sense impressions. Colors which the eye had seen, sounds which the ear had heard had a long after effect in the soul. This was expressed in the fact that the Mohals developed feelings which their Lemurian ancestors did not yet know. For example, the attachment to past experience was a part of these feelings. The development of memory was connected with that of language. As long as human beings did not preserve the past, there could be no communication through the medium of language of what had been experienced. The appearance of first beginnings of memory in the final Lemurian period meant that it was also possible for the faculty of giving a name to what had been seen and heard to have its inception. Only human beings who have the faculty of recollection can make use of a name which has been given to something. The Atlantean period, therefore, is the one in which the development of language took place. With language, a bond was established between the human soul and the things outside the human being. People produce sound words inside themselves, and these sound words belong to the objects of the external world. A new bond is formed also among human beings by communication through the medium of language. It is true that all this existed in a still youthful form among the Mohals, but nevertheless it distinguished them profoundly from their Lemurian forefathers. The soul powers of these first Atlanteans still possessed something of the forces of nature. These people were more closely related to the beings of nature which surrounded them than were their successors. Their soul powers were more connected with forces of nature than are those of modern human beings. Thus the sound word which they produced had something of the power of nature. They not only named things, but their words contained a power over things and also over their fellow human beings. The word of the Rmoahals not only had meaning, but also pure. The magic power of words is something which was far truer for them than it is for people today. When a Rmoahals person pronounced a word, this word developed a power similar to that of the object it designated. Because of this, words at that time were curative. They could advance the growth of plants, tame the rage of animals, and perform other similar functions. All this progressively decreased in force among the later subraces of the Atlanteans. One could say that the original fullness of power was gradually lost. The Rmoahals felt this plenitude of power to be a gift of mighty nature, and their relationship to the latter had a religious character. For them, language was something especially sacred. The misuse of certain sounds, which Pyo assessed an important power, was an impossibility. They felt that such misuse would cause them enormous harm. The good magic of such words would have changed into its opposite. Something that would have brought blessing if used properly would bring ruin to the author if used criminally. In a kind of innocence of feeling, the Rmoahals ascribed their power not so much to themselves as to divine nature acting within them. This changed among the second subrace, the so-called Tlavatli peoples. The people of this race began to develop a sense of their own personal value. Ambition, a quality unknown to the Rmoahals, made itself felt among them. Memory in a certain sense became part of their conception of the nature of communal life. A person who could look back upon certain deeds he had performed demanded recognition of them from his fellow human beings. Such a person would demand that his works be preserved in memory. Based upon this memory of deeds, groups of people belonging together would elect one person from amongst themselves as leader. A kind of royal rank developed. Such recognition was even preserved beyond death. The memory, the remembrance of the ancestors or of those who had acquired merit in life, developed. From this there emerged among some tribes a kind of religious veneration of the deceased, a cult of ancestor worship. This cult continued into much later times and took the most varied forms. Among the Rmoahals it was still the case that a person was esteemed only to the degree to which he commanded respect at a given moment through his powers. If someone among them wanted recognition for what he had done in earlier days, he had to demonstrate by new deeds that he still possessed his old power. He had to recall the old works to memory by means of new ones. What had been done was not recognized for its own sake. Only the second subrace considered the personal character of a person to the point where it took his past life into account in the evaluation of his character. A further consequence of memory for the communal life of human beings was the fact that groups were formed which were held together by the remembrance of common deeds. Previously, the formation of groups depended wholly upon natural forces, upon common descent. Human beings did not add anything through their own mind to what nature had made of them. Now a powerful personality would recruit a number of people for a joint undertaking, and the memory of this joint action formed a social group. This kind of social communal life became fully developed only among the third subrace, the Toltecs. It was therefore the people of this race who first founded what can be called a community, the first method of forming a state. The leadership, the government of these communities, was transmitted from one generation to the next. The father now passed on to the son what previously survived only in the memory of contemporaries. The deeds of the ancestors were not to be forgotten by their whole line of descent. What an ancestor had done was honored in his descendants, however. One must realize that in those times people actually had the power to transmit their gifts to their descendants. Education, after all, was calculated to mold life through vivid images. The effectiveness of this education had its foundation in the personal power which emanated from the educator. He did not sharpen the power of thought, but developed those gifts which were of a more instinctive kind. Through such a system of education, the capacities of the father were in most cases transmitted to the son. Under such circumstances, personal experience acquired more and more importance among the third subrace. When one group of human beings separated from another, it took along for the foundation of a new community the remembrance of what it had experienced at the place of its previous existence. But at the same time, there was something in this memory which the group did not find suitable for itself, with which it did not feel at ease. Therefore, it then tried something new. Thus, conditions improved every time that such a new community was established. It was only natural that what was better should be imitated. These are the facts which explain the development of the flourishing communities in the period of the third subrace, described in theosophical literature. These acquired personal experiences were supported by those who were initiated into the eternal laws of spiritual development. Powerful rulers themselves were initiated, so that personal ability might have full support. Through their personal abilities, human beings slowly prepared themselves for initiation. They first had to develop their powers from the bottom up in order that enlightenment from above could be given to them. In this way, the initiated kings and leaders of the Atlanteans were created. Enormous power lay in their hands, and they were greatly venerated. But this circumstance also contained the cause for decline and decay. The development of memory led to the preeminent power of personality. Human wanted to count for something through their power. The greater their power became, the more they wanted to exploit it for themselves. The ambition which had devil oped turned into manifest selfishness, thus the misuse of these powers arose. When one considers the capabilities of the Atlanteans resulting from their mastery of the life force, one will understand that such misuse inevitably had enormous consequences. Wide-ranging power over nature could be put at the service of personal egotism. This was accomplished in full measure by the fourth subrace, the first Turanians. The members of this race, who were instructed in the mastery of the powers described above, often used them in order to satisfy their selfish wishes and desires. But used in such a manner, these powers destroy each other in their reciprocal effects. It is as if the feet were stubbornly to carry a man forward while his torso wanted to go backward. Such a destructive effect could only be halted through the development of a higher faculty in human beings. This was the faculty of thought. Logical thinking has a restraining effect on selfish personal desires.